Good afternoon. It's the appointed time and we have a quorum. I call the meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the panel on environmental affairs. There is only one item on the agenda, which is a review of the fourth technical memorandum for allocation of emission allowances for power plants. Please invite the administration to join us. We have with us the Undersecretary for the Environment, Ms. Christine Low, Deputy Secretary for the Environment, Mr. Vincent Liu, and also Mr. Andrew Lai from the Environmental Protection Department. He's the Deputy Director of Environmental Protection. We also have from the same department, Assistant Director Mr. Mok Wai Chun, and Principal Environmental Protection Officer Mr. Dave Ho, and from the Environment Bureau, Chief Electrical and Mechanical Engineer Mr. Andy Ho. I apologize, I have to stall a bit because the officials are not yet seated. Undersecretary, may I ask you to clarify? This is a special meeting. Some members told me that it is still the summer recess and they may not attend today's meeting because they have some outside work to do. But in relation to the technical memorandum, this is one of the many times. And you know full well when the review would start and when it would finish. Then why didn't you put it in the regular agenda item? Why did you try to get a discussion during the summer recess? Because by doing so, some members may not be able to participate because they are out of town. Perhaps you can use this chance to clarify. I remember the third technical memorandum was also tabled during summer recess. And there is less of a chance for members to participate as a result. I do apologize. I have to trouble you to have a meeting during the summer recess, but it's for a good reason. The legislation requires us to 4 years in advance legislate. So sometimes for the third and the fourth technical memorandum, we had to come here to have a meeting during summer recess. In the middle of next month, the legislative year will start, but the 21st is a public holiday. Well, after we've come to here, we have to go to the Environmental Advisory Council, and then we will have to come back here to have the legislation endorsed by, say, November. And if we wait till the legislative year has started, then there is a chance that we may not make the deadline. This technical memorandum will take effect in 2026. Well, I don't know what the situation will be in 2016 because there will be the general election. I hope you'll understand that sometimes I have no other choice. Well, I'd like to draw your attention to members' views. They are willing to have a meeting. It's not the case that they refuse to have a meeting during summer recess, but on more than one occasion you ask for a meeting during summer holidays, and as a result some members are not able to attend. Let's start the agenda item. Who is going to present the paper to us? We have both the air quality team and also the energy team here. Is it going to be Mr. Lai who's going to take us through the paper? We asked members to support the formulation of the fifth TM. to reduce the emission allowance starting from the 1st of January 2020 to improve air quality. Under the Air Pollution Control Ordinance, the Secretary for Environment should at least once every 2 years review the emission allowances. In relation to power plants, there are 3 pollutions. They are sulfur dioxide, SO2, nitrogen oxide, NOx, and respirable suspendable particulates, RSP. We have to take into account practicability and also health, air quality health objectives. Last time we came here, we formulated the 4th TM with your support, and that would take effect in 2019. The allowances was based on the existing power generation unit and the then fuel mix. We have tightened the allowances to take effect from 2019, having taken into account the performances of these generation units. For the 5th TM, we have taken into account the latest situation, different factors for the 2 power plants. We reckon that there is a slight drop in the power demand on the Hong Kong Island, and for the HEP or the HEC, there is a new gas-fired generation unit. So for the 3 pollutants, we propose to reduce the allowances for the 3 pollutants from 26% to 28%. For CLP, they provide electricity for Kowloon and New Territories, and there is a slight demand increase. We've had a discussion with the CLP, and they are willing to conform to the fuel mix proposed in Daya Bay. There will be an increase in nuclear power import. So for CLP, in relation to the 3 pollutants, it can be reduced further for between 9% to 12%. After we have formulated the 5th TM, because of the construction of a new generation unit, it may have an impact on tariff. And you may also know from the paper that for CLP, there is a need to build new gas generation unit to meet the recently published fuel mix. However, for the CLP, they are still going through the environmental impact assessment. So this factor alone has not been taken into account. For the new unit, the CLP will follow the established procedure. If next year this new unit is approved, we will come back to the LegCo and this panel to formulate the 6th TM to further tighten emission allowances. For our way forward, we hope that at the end of October we will introduce to LegCo by way of negative vetting the 5th TM as subsidiary legislation. Next year, if we have new decisions in relation to new generation units, we will propose to formulate a new TM, and we will come back to the panel because this is related to the reduction target 2020 with Guangdong province. Thank you. Well, you've all heard from the Assistant Director. This is actually a legislative proposal, so we will need to have a detailed discussion. First, Mr. Stephen Ho and Wu Chi Wai, 5 minutes each. Question and answer included. Thank you. First of all, well, if you refer to Table 1 on page 5, there is a projected emissions for CLP and HEC. For HEC is from 26 to 29, for CLP 9% to 12%. Well, you have explained that for HEC there will be a new unit, And for CLP, apart from changing the percentage of nuclear power, there is little they can do. But a lot of people misunderstand that a lot of people would think that with the new unit there can be further reduction. Well, by increasing the use of other fuel and existing technology, can they further reduce the emission? Have you given them any advice? And in relation to power consumption, you say that there is going to be an increase by about 1%. But in the coming 5 years, what is the situation per capita? Is it going to be an increase for per capita consumption or a reduction? Who is to take the question? Mr. Lai? Well, perhaps a deputy director. Perhaps I will first answer in relation to the reduction performance. Mr. Ho's understanding is right. For HEC, there is a preliminary approval of the new gas-fired unit. So, in relation to this emission allowance, that is included. As a result, the extent of reduction for HEC is bigger. For CLP, the room for reduction is from the import of more nuclear power. So local generation will reduce, but it has not reflected generation units that is under planning. And they are still at the stage of an EIA. They have yet to compile an EIA report. So no approval has been given. Well, for the CLP new gas-fired unit, we have to wait and see what the scale it is, what the performance is, before we can decide on the reduction, and that will be taken into account in the next TM. I will now defer to Mr. Lau, Deputy Secretary. In relation to HEC and CLP and the electricity demand in the respective areas, for CLP, that is NT and Kowloon, there will be a slight increase in electricity demand because in new territories and Kowloon there will be some new infrastructure and new development area that explains the increase in demand. And in relation to HEC, we reckon the power consumption will be stable or a slight drop or a slight decrease because we don't see any new development in terms of infrastructure or residential ones. That is in relation to the coming few years. We encourage at the same time power conservation, and we think that there will be a drop in electricity demand for Hong Kong Island. My question has not been answered. For CLP, excluding the planned generation unit, what about existing unit? Can they be enhanced? Say, for example, the coal-fired unit, will there be any further enhancement?
Mr. Lai, thank you, Mr. Ho, for your question. With regard to the use of green coal, actually we needed 2 power companies to look further into green coal because it would emit less sulfur dioxide. However, we cannot rely on the complete utilization of green coal because it is not exactly perfect for power generation units. About 5 years ago, the 2 power companies retrofitted their facilities with new emission control devices. So although the fuel mix has not changed, the emission level has dropped. However, in the future, these units may age. So we are asking the power companies to maintain their high level of performance. This is a challenge to the power companies. Mr. Wu Chiwai. Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 points to make. First, now for this TM, we actually have to look at the actual situation and we will come up with the latest requirements. So I don't think I need to challenge you. However, there are 2 points that I would like to ask the government about. Now for HEC, yes, well, I think that the reduction of power consumption would also help to reduce pollution. So when you talk to HEC, would you ask them to encourage the reduction of power consumption? For example, tariff reduction can be used as an incentive for consumers. And also in the paper, it is stated that in 2019, CLP will have 10% more in terms of nuclear imports. Does it mean that all the Daya Bay generated nuclear power will be transmitted to Hong Kong? So for the Daya Bay nuclear power plants, does it have to abide by any codes? And also, when we talk about fuel mix in the future, natural gas will be a very important factor. So for CLP, it's not telling the government that it will add a new gas-fired unit. Does it have other policies? Will it be acquiring gas from all over the world? And does this have an impact on the tariff so that the tariff level can be kept at a stable level? Otherwise, if the assets increase, tariff may also increase. So I want to know more about the negotiation between the government and CLP. Deputy Secretary, as to CLP, whether it would encourage people to consume less electricity. Actually, this year we have published a paper concerning energy saving. We hope that energy consumption can be reduced by 40%. And also in 2018, the scheme of control agreements will expire. Now we are conducting a public consultation. We have collected some views and now we are analyzing them. In the future, we will talk to the 2 power companies, and when we negotiate with them, we will take into account public views. We hope that they can encourage energy saving. As for nuclear import, and CLP as well as Daya Bay, now they have an agreement that is 70% of the nuclear output will be given to Hong Kong. So now they are having a short-term arrangement which is up to 2018. And after 2018, we hope that the CLP can continue with this kind of arrangement. That is 80% of Daya Bay generated electricity will be imported to Hong Kong, but this is just an even number. Actually, in the summer, it's over 90%. So most of the electricity generated by Daya Bay will be transmitted to Hong Kong. As for acquiring natural gas, when we look at the existing fuel mix, we actually hope that the 2 power companies will use more natural gas in the future so that they can better protect the environment. So for the 2 power companies, they would have to look for extra sources of natural gas. They are exactly doing that. Other than the mainland, they are also importing natural gas from other countries. The 2 power companies will do more in this area, because more natural gas will be used to replace coal, and this will have a pressure on tariff level. As to how big the impact will be, we will have to look at the future price of natural gas, the price of LPG and coal, etc. Mr. Christopher Chung. Chairman, I have some questions concerning renewable energy. I refer to paragraph 13, and you are saying that 2 GWh of electricity will be supplied by renewable energy. Well, does the government have a policy to improve the supply of RE? Now, because for emission reduction, I think you should have a timetable. You should encourage the use of RE, and more R&D should be done, but I don't see that here. For cities big and small in China, they use a lot of RE. For example, the street lamps, they would use solar power or wind power. So I think you should invest in R&D in terms of RE. But I don't think our government is doing that. You just have 1 or 2 wind turbines and you think you've done the job. This is quite perfunctory. So for RE, you do not have confidence in that, right? Who's going to answer this question? Under Secretary, as for RE, yes, we want to see that. Now you can look at our public consultation paper on electricity market. In Hong Kong, we hope to develop RE. And if you want to talk about wind farms or solar farms, in Hong Kong, we really do not have the conditions to do that in a large scale. However, in terms of waste to energy, we have done something, and this has already been explained to members. And also, in the electricity market, we have a scheme of control agreement system. For those who would like to install photovoltaic panels, now it's easy for them. Maybe Deputy Secretary can supplement. As the Under Secretary said just now, for large-scale RE projects, for example, wind farms, because the cost is high. So if we do it in a large scale, it will have an impact on tariff. In the public consultation, we also put this forward. We hope to hear from the public as to whether we should increase tariff so that we can develop such projects in large scale. However, for isolated RE utilization, for example, solar panels installed in village houses, etc., we do think there is a room for development. So we will discuss with the power companies and try to find out what they can do so that this kind of scattered utilization of RE can be encouraged. When we talk to the 2 power companies, we will follow up on this. Mr. Chung, I don't think the government is proactive enough. We ask questions and you say that you will just try to talk to the power companies. You should have a plan to do that. I don't think we have less sun than Shenzhen. So how come Shenzhen can do that and we cannot? Do you think this is not cost efficient? If that is the case, you can simply tell us that you are not going to do that. Will you say that? If not, do you have an R&D timetable, or will you have some pilot schemes in certain areas? You are not doing that. However, for the cities that are close to us, they are doing that. Well, I don't think we have less sun than Dongguan or Shenzhen. I think you should think about this. Have you thought about that, Under Secretary? We have thought about that. Maybe we do not have enough time to discuss this today. But Mr. Chung, perhaps you can look at our energy-saving blueprints. we have talked about RE and what our direction will be. And for our consultation paper, well, we haven't said that we are not going to do that. However, we have a lot of limitations. We will try to develop under such restrictions. So for the first round, do other members have questions? If not, now I will use my 5 minutes for asking 2 questions. First, Under Secretary, just now you said that Hong Kong cannot do solar energy because we do not have a big site. Quite some time ago, I made a suggestion to your bureau. Now, some landfills are being refurbished or renovated, and on such sites, you cannot build big structures. So why can't you put it to better use? They can be used as solar farms. For this size, they cannot be developed within 5 or 10 years. So why don't you do that? And that's another question. Mr. Wu also asked a similar question. Now, when we look at the fuel mix, percentage of natural gas will be increased to 50. We all know that natural gas is very expensive. Now, how can you ensure that our people can enjoy fresh air and at the same time they won't have to pay high electricity tariff? Now, you're saying that more natural gas will be used. However, I think you should also pay attention to RE. Well, you are talking about 1 or 2% of RE. That is not enough. And in order to achieve that 1 or 2%, where does the RE come from? It comes from the food waste factories or sludge factories, and then the electricity generated will be put in the power grid. So you are not trying to generate more RE. It's just a byproduct of food waste treatment or sludge treatment. That is not the right way to do it. Under Secretary, let me ask the last question first. As for RE, its definition is very broad. If you look at RE, if you think it's just wind power or solar power, then in Hong Kong we cannot do much. However, if we look at other types of RE, for example, hydroelectricity, now in Hong Kong we really do not have the ability to do that. And if we buy it from the mainland, then it's another discussion. Maybe we are not discussing that today. In Hong Kong, can we do more in terms of wind energy? Well, the 2 power companies have found a small site on the sea for the possible construction of wind farms. But you all know that it's quite expensive. And when these 2 sites are completed, it can only account for 1 or 2% of electricity generation in Hong Kong. I cannot say that we will never build them. However, if we build them, they can only supply a small amount of electricity for Hong Kong. And for waste to energy, this is a new international trend. In the past, when you burnt waste, the power generator would not be used, but now we are using that. As for landfill, should we use those sites for solar farms? Now, if we look at solar farms in other countries, they tend to be quite small. So for our restored landfills, should we use them this way? Because also many of our restored landfills will be used for other purposes. Some of them will be used for sports and leisure.
Tim,
You may recall a special scheme of ours. If we now take it back to study as to whether to use the sites for renewable energy, well, then that means we will have to backtrack halfway through. Well, we still have 3 landfills that have not reached capacity, but we're talking about a very long time into the future. What about tariff in relation to natural gas? There are 4 major policies: stability, safety, environmental protection, and also affordability. And if you want environmental protection, then you may have to pay a higher tariff. So if we increase the percentage of natural gas in place of coal, inevitably there will be pressure on tariff. So on one hand, if you want to use gas instead of coal, and the second thing is to use gas-fired units instead of coal-fired unit. Well, if we have to build new gas-fired units, we have to ensure during the approval stage that the cost will be reasonable, and it will not start production prematurely, because that will push up tariff, and we will do our work. Second round, Mr. Wu Chi-wai, 4 minutes. Thank you. Well, this is about the 5th technical memorandum. And the requirement of reduction for CLP is based on an increase in nuclear power by 10% in 2019. Have you talked to CLP? If we use energy conservation, that is one of the directions for emission reduction. And if you use this, there is actually not much meaning. So have the government considered a certain percentage so that power companies will not solely rely on retrofitting devices using nuclear power or building more gas-fired units? They will also pursue emission reduction by way of energy conservation. Otherwise, we rely only new generation units and the use of different fuel. But the best way for the environment is to require the 2 power companies to use energy conservation as part of the emission reduction. So has the government considered this? And if this time round it can't be done, will you consider it in the next round? Deputy Director. Mr. Wu's understanding is right. In the existing technical memorandum is based on the use of a cleaner fuel mix, say for example more renewable energy or nuclear power. And as to the use of a gas-fired unit to replace coal-fired unit, that is also one of the ways. Well, apart from fuel mix and performance, demand management is also very important. That's why at the outset we've said that we have published a consultation document about energy conservation campaign. If it's supported, if it's proved to be successful, then if there is a drop in electricity demand, we will use that as a target to tighten emission allowances. But we will only do that when we see there is a drop in demand. Maybe what I have in mind is different from that of the Deputy Director. If we have the technical memorandum, it's just that all you have considered have been technicalities instead of electricity conservation. I'm not talking about whether these publicity events and campaign will increase the awareness. Can they solely rely on new fuel mix and new generation unit? And if that can't be achieved through these technical means, then you will have to turn to energy conservation. Give them an incentive so that it can be done. Don't just stay at the stage of publicity campaign. You have to lean on them so that they will do something more effective. And it's something we can see in Western countries. Who is going to take this? Deputy Secretary. Well, a few years ago, we conducted a study on the development of the electricity market. We received a lot of submissions saying that for the two power companies, they can set energy conservation objectives, and there can be some incentive programs in place for the power companies. We have analyzed the views, and it's something that we will consider in our future discussion with the power companies. Can I have a short supplementary? Yes. So is it the case that for the 6th technical memorandum, energy conservation will be part of emission reduction? It will be one of the tools, yes or no? I fully understand where Mr. Wu comes from. Sometimes we talk about the demand side, and whereas other times we talk about the supply side. For the TM, it's from the perspective of emission reduction of the 3 pollutants. So for power companies, if their generation units are more energy efficient, then they will make more profit, and there are other benefits. We have another mechanism, the scheme of control agreement to regulate the two power companies. We would like to include energy efficiency as well. We use different ways to achieve the target. Mr. Wu's direction is right, but it may not be done through a TM. I believe under SCA, the scheme of control agreement may be more effective. No other questions? Any other questions from members? If not, well, this item is finished. I think you all agree that this paper the relevant department will formulate the legislation necessary, and you also note members' points. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.